Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra comic review. This is going to be my full spoiler review for The Legend of Korra: Patterns in Time. So this book is out today, Wednesday, November 30th in comic book stores, but it's out today in comic book stores only. So the digital release is not today. If you've ordered online from a place that isn't a comic store, you won't have the book today. You are going to have to wait until December 20th to get a digital copy, or from Amazon or anywhere like that. So that's a really important thing to get across here. We had this weird kind of split delay to one specific distributor that affected mass market, but it didn't affect comic book stores. So just be aware of that. Comic stores today until December 20th when it will be out absolutely everywhere. So what's interesting about this book is that it is Dark Horse's only new comic release of the year. And by new, I mean it has new story content in it. Yes, there was the free comic book day that had Beach Wars in it. But in terms of a book you can actually buy, will be regularly available, this is it. And I think before we get into talking about just the details of this book, there are a couple of things to talk about because the path to this book's release has been tough. It's been a tough book to keep track of in terms of the information, the details, the release date. I did my best this week with videos to make it clear, posts online and stuff like that, to make it clear after all of these delays that the book is out this week in comic book stores, but it's next month everywhere else. Because Dark Horse have not communicated very well about this book, considering it's their only new comic release of the year. So what I want to get into first is to discuss just how insane the delays were to this book. This book, by my count, has been delayed 10 or 11 times. And now obviously one specific delay is specific to comic store as to everywhere except comic stores. So, you know, there's potentially even another one on top of that. But this book was meant to be out April this year to more or less coincide with the exact month of the Korra 10-year anniversary. Instead, it is just barely making it out in 2022, especially the whole mass market release, just barely making it out this year. Now, Dark Horse have responded to a few people online, pretty much just saying what they've said about delays over the last couple of years, and that is basically, have you heard of the pandemic? Are you aware there's a shipping crisis going on that also affects like printing and stuff like that? That's been their explanation for why this book has been delayed basically from April into November/December, is that general shipping and stuff like that. Now, that's fine. You can't really deny that that's the case because it is happening. Lots of stuff is getting delayed, but it seems particularly excessive with this book. And then the problem begins to come in when you compare what has happened to this book to kind of other books that have happened and other examples from the past. So let me just bring this up here. So you can see here's just a quick slide I put together of recent Dark Horse delays. So on one side you can see just the name of a couple of books, and then on the other side you can see two dates. One is basically the original date that was either the book was announced with or that the book had as we started 2022, and then the actual is obviously when the book actually came out. So you'll note that North and South Omnibus was a book that came out this year from Dark Horse, announced for February 22nd. It came out February 22nd. Now, I believe there was a somewhat late in the game comic book store release date for that one, so kind of the reverse of the situation we have right now. I'm not sure how confirmed or not that is, but I remember hearing something about that. But either way, mass market, this book actually came out when it was meant to, so there was no delay with this book in particular. The Korra Book 3 art book 2nd edition received, as you can see there, 5 weeks of delay, so a month and a little bit. And again, that's what you would expect from what's happening. The book to get like 1 or 2 delays and just be slightly pushed back. Those are the ones that you can understand and likely are down to shipping issues and so on. That, yeah, a week or 2 up to probably a month and a half feels like, okay, yeah, that's understandable. The Korra Book 4 art book was originally scheduled for June 21st, ended up coming out July 26th. So again, pushed back by about a month and a week, give or take. The Turf Wars Omnibus basically hit its date. It was scheduled originally for November 15th. It ended up coming out November 16th. Now, I have the asterisk next to this because basically a similar thing affects some of the very recent books that affected this, which is that it hit its original comic book store date. It just missed its mass market date. So it basically has one delay to one distributor in particular. Same thing for Team Avatar Treasury here, scheduled for October 4th. It hit the date for comic book stores, but was delayed mass market. I bring up Team Avatar Tales here as an example because it is the other Avatar book that is the exact same format as Patterns in Time, in that it is 3 free comic book day reprints and a couple of new stories. So exact same sort of like page count style of book here. And you'll note that this is all pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, all that sort of stuff. And look at that. Scheduled for September 5th, 2018, eventually came out October 15th, 2019. Over a year's worth of delays. And I can assure you, having covered all of this, that was across probably 6-7 different release dates, give or take. So this book basically had a very similar treatment to this book, which, as you can see here, Patterns in Time, scheduled for I think April 12th, eventually came out November 30th today in comic stores, but obviously it's December everywhere else for a 7 to 8 month delay overall. And then Chibi Comic Volume 1, which is the next comic release, was originally scheduled for July 27th, 2021, is now coming out January 31st, 2023. So you can see that's a really, really extreme example. And what is the connection that you have here? The books that get heavily delayed are the books that actually have new content in them. The books in yellow are new content. The books in white are reprint books. And you can see relatively minimal delays for the reprint books that feel like, yeah, understandable shipping thing. So why all of a sudden are the shipping issues magnified by like 5 to 10 times compared to the other books just because they're new content? That's the problem. And that's what I think Dark Horse have failed to communicate to anyone, why that has actually happened, why that's the case with these books. I really do not get why that is. Now, specifically with Patterns in Time, we have little bits of information if you watch the New York Comic Con panel where they talked about this a little bit. Apparently Patterns in Time was originally planned, they were working on it before Avatar Studios was formed. That means it has to be before February 2021, meaning that basically this book was in planning like 2 years ago. Now, what seems to have happened is that Avatar Studios formed, and we know Avatar Studios has had an effect on more or less everything that Dark Horse has done. We've seen a shift in the comics from comic trilogies to one-shots, and we're only just about getting back on track. And it looks like for the most part, we're not really getting back on track until like the second half of next year. So there, for the most part, does seem like with the comics, like there's been this, adapting to Avatar Studios period. We know for sure one of the comics, at least in this book, was the script was completely changed from what was originally planned. I'll get to that in the review when I get to talking about that story. So I get the impression that that's probably something that happened. There was maybe initial plans for these stories to be something. They changed them in part because of Avatar Studios, which pushed the book back from a somewhat early point. Then they also had shipping issues, and that explains why it's actually come out so late. But again, they haven't communicated much of that along the way. The final thing before I get into the review I do want to talk about is sort of the other side of communication. That is just simply marketing the book and letting people know what is actually in this book, what the book is about, and generating hype for your one new comic release of the year. And have Dark Horse done a good job there? No, they have not. Because fundamentally, the only thing they've ever said about this book is the description that is on the back of the book. And it is extraordinarily general. Let me just read this out. Celebrate new stories from The Legend of Korra. Your favorite characters from Team Avatar and beyond are here in this collection of stories. From the heartwarming to the hilarious. Join Korra, Asami, Mako, Bolin, Tenzin, and more familiar faces from The Legend of Korra, featured in stories specially crafted by a bevy of talented comic creators. Be sure to add these all-new stories to your Avatar library. So note, they do not say on the back of this book a single idea about what's actually in this book. They name the main cast in a general sense, and they leave it at that. Even if you go further into sort of like posts and stuff like that have gone out about it. Okay, we know a few more of the creators involved. If you go to a website that has the preview pages, you will know that, okay, the preview pages are pages from the free comic book day books that are in here, but they're not the new books that are in here. Note that it doesn't say that on the back. It doesn't say that some of these are reprints, that some of these are new. They just say all new, which is not correct. And then another thing I'll point out from the back of the book is that they mention Korra, Asami, Mako, Bolin, and Tenzin. Mako and Bolin are not in this book. And that I'm not, what I'm saying here is they're not in this book at all. It's not that they're not featured in any of the stories to like a big degree. They don't get a story, but they do not appear, as far as I'm aware, in any panel in this book in any capacity. They're just not here whatsoever. Bolin at least was featured this year in Beach Wars in the free comic book day book, but that's not in this book. So Mako completely has been left out. Bolin's not in any of this stuff, and you're beginning to maybe see what the issue is here, in that a lot of people going into this, I think, have no idea where to set their expectations unless they know what the stories are. And that's the thing. Dark Horse, until very late in the game, didn't really say what was in this book. And I'd say most people going in won't know. Only hardcore fans would actually know, because I put out my early review because I got a review copy. And I think that's how most people found out what's actually in this book. Otherwise, I also happened to find from one of the artists that they'd put up art from their comic in the book. So that was sort of me finding extra preview pages to at least show off one of the stories. But otherwise, people don't know. Dark Horse didn't just put out a list of what the stories are, and I don't think that is a spoiler. That should not be a surprise. You should know what the stories are in this book going in. And that to me is the biggest problem that we've had here. And even at New York Comic Con, when they talked about it, they just mentioned the Alexandria Monique story, Cat Owl's Cradle, and the Skyscrapers, the Yasuko and Asami story. They didn't mention the other ones at all. So I just think that is very weak marketing to effectively release this kind of almost mystery of a book. That, especially because it's a short story collection, an anthology, I think you should be much more upfront about what is actually in this or not. So I hope Dark Horse can fix that going forward. Now, maybe this is part of the whole communication situation and things changing, and this is probably why it has a generic back of the book, is that maybe there were different stories planned initially when they wrote the kind of marketing blurb and stuff like that. But I don't know if that's actually the case or not. Just that it does feel like me as an Avatar content creator did more of a job to hype up this book than Dark Horse themselves did, to the point where I do feel a lot of people today are going to get a little bit of a surprise and hear that, like, wait, the one Korra comic I was waiting for is actually out today, but wait, I can't get it today because I don't have a local comic book store, and I have to wait another bunch of weeks to get it. And that's just an all in all a not great situation, because even when we get to the December release date, you're so late in the year, you're so close to Christmas and New Year's and stuff like that. I just don't feel it's the best time to release your one big story, in that, like, will it get much hype when it actually comes out? Now, let's finally get into actually talking about this book. I wanted to do that whole kind of before the review bit here, Because fundamentally, I feel I said most of what I'm going to say here in my early review for this book. So I'm just going to be a little bit more kind of like detailed as I go through it. The one thing I really held back on in the early review was directly sort of like reading out quotes from the book or anything like that. So let's just sort of get into it here. So Patterns in Time has 8 short stories in it. Like I said before, 3 of them are the Free Comic Book Day reprints, and there are 5 news stories. So the Free Comic Book Day reprints are Friends for Life, which is the Korra and Naga short story. We have Lost Pets, which is the Korra and Milo Find Lost Animals story. And then we have last year's Free Comic Book Day book, Clearing the Air, which is a Tenzin backstory story. Now, for the sake of the review here, those 3 reprint books get a bit of a positive thing just for being reprinted officially here in a mass market book. That's good to have for collectors, for everyone, just so it's more accessible than the Free Comic Book Day issues. So that's good. I will not be factoring the quality of those 3 stories into my review score for the story of this book, because those books came out last year and in years before. In terms of the new release aspect of this book, it's all on the news stories. The news stories are Skyscrapers, which is a young Asami and her mother Yasuko story. There's Wisdom, which is a very small Gurulahima story. There is A Change in the Wind, which is a primarily Jinora story, but Korra and Asami play quite a big role in it as well. It's a very character-focused book, that one. There is Weaver's Ball, which is a kind of young teenage Korra story, still in the middle of her avatar training prior to the start of Korra with episode 1. And then there is Cat Owl's Cradle, which is a Milo and Boomy story. And this is one thing that I think we have to talk about straight off the bat, which is sort of the variety in this. This is an anthology collection. At one point when it was scheduled for April, in marketing, Dark Horse did say that this was to celebrate the anniversary of Korra this year. It doesn't feel like that. Fundamentally, what I would say about this book is that it literally is just the Korra version of this book. Now, I think this is a lot better because in general, the quality of stories in this book are better. I think on their Free Comic Book Day reprints, it's relatively even, but in terms of the new content in each of these books, Korra wins by like quite a bit in my mind. I think they really didn't quite get the story selection right in Team Avatar Tales. It's better here in terms of general quality, but it still has a lot of the problems in that it means you only have 5 new stories, and the variety of characters, as you can sort of tell, isn't quite there fundamentally, because the book with the reprints already has a young Korra in training story in Friends for Life, and I don't think Weaver's Ball is as good as Friends for Life. It has its own kind of thing going on, but I don't think it's the strongest book in here. Similarly, there's also a Milo story already in Lost Pets. Now, to be fair, I think the new story, Cat Owl's Cradle, is better than Lost Pets, so that's something at least. But then what I would say about the other stories is just that A Change in the Wind is, in my mind, the best because it's the most character focused, and that's kind of what I want coming out of this, and I think it's the best written one, where you get the most from Korra, the most from Asami, and the most from Jinora in this entire book, and it feels like it had the right length for what it was going for, and just it's the best overall package to me as a story in this book. The young Asami and Yasuko one, I know a lot of people were excited for it, but for me, I think the more and more I think about it, the more and more disappointed with it I actually am. Because this is the story where it was completely rewritten at a certain point. The writer at New York Comic Con said they had initially submitted a story they considered to be quite dark, and were basically told to completely rewrite it. So the impression I get is that the writer probably, when given the idea, we want you to write a Yasuko story, probably straight up went for the death of Yasuko's story, and was told not to do that. And instead, we get this 4-page story That is nice because it's the first time properly seeing Yasuko in a story, and it's young Asami, and it's kind of cute to see that mother-daughter relationship, but it's nothing more than that. And I think it struggles with its page count, and it doesn't, to me, quite come together in the way I would want. And it's one of the books where I'm kind of like desperate for, like, that's the one, if anything, in this book. It needed a little bit more page count badly. I don't know how they made that decision to only give it 4 pages, but it was weird. The other book, the Gurulahima one, I know a lot of people will be like, crazy, Gurulahima. It's 2 pages long, and it's nice for what it is, as just an extra sort of throw-in, but it does sort of mean that the book technically really only has 4 stories, because this one is so straightforward, where, like, it's sort of just visuals over, like, basically a Gurulahima sort of, like, proverb, basically. And it's good, it's nice, people I think will appreciate it as being something different, because it's, in a way, not about the direct kind of Korra era characters. It is about this ancient character who we first learned about in Korra. But it also feels a bit weird that that's one of the only times we kind of do that. Now, there's a couple of flashback stories you can say here that explains the whole patterns in time thing here. But you'll notice another thing, in addition to no Bolin, no Mako, not a lot of focus on quite a lot of other characters either, is I didn't really mention Korrasami. And this is thing I saw. One of the biggest things I think people were hyped for with this book is to get a kind of basically full-on Korrasami short story. Because this is where it feels like is a perfect opportunity to, in one of these stories, literally just have a Korra and Asami fun relationship times, character development for both of them. You don't need the plot going on to maybe get in the way of it. They don't really do that here, because the only book that really has Korrasami in it is A Change in the Wind. And I would go as far as to say that that is a more Jinora-centric story than it is Korra and Asami. Now, it still has good Korrasami moments, in that I think Korrasami fans will like the stuff that is there, quite a bit actually, in that there's some very good stuff in it, and in general for those 3 characters it's very strong. But definitely, in terms of the thing that I think people were most hyped for with this book, I don't think it delivers on the Korrasami stuff as much as you would think, in that the cover is purely just a cover. This is not particularly representative of anything in this book as such. It probably connects the most to A Change in the Wind, but it's the connection is subtle. This is completely unrelated. Kind of in the same way the Team Avatar Tales cover was unrelated also, but you know, you get the idea. Because they didn't do that much marketing or telling us what is or isn't in the book officially, people are going to have expectations going in, unless they've sort of like read my, watched my early review or anything like that, found out that information. They're not going to have their expectations in the right place. And so my prediction for where people are at with this, before I go really detailed in on these stories, is that, like myself, I gave this book, I think, a 7 or a 7.5. It depends on like what way I'm feeling, but I think it deserves a good score because it's better than Team Avatar Tales, which I thought was absolutely average as a book. This at least is an improvement over that, but I don't think it does anything amazing to earn a really, really strong review score. I think with this amount of page count, this amount of creators involved, this amount of page count even, more can be done with short stories than were done here. As the lone release of the year for Dark Horse, it doesn't work as the lone release. This needed backup from other books. It didn't get it, so it's sort of left out on its own, and it's not quite enough, especially this late in the year. So let's get into it here. So in terms of the news stories, we start with Skyscrapers. Now, what actually happens in this, like I said, it's only 4 pages, is that you see Yasuko in her room. Yasuko is an architect, of course. She's working on designing a building, and young Asami comes in and is kind of like, oh, what are you doing? And she says, no, I'm doing this blueprint. They're due in 2 days. And so even though she's under a little bit of a time crunch, she takes the time aside to answer in detail her daughter's question here. And so she shows Asami the blueprint. This is a drawing of a building that people will build one day. It's going to be a skyscraper, the Sato School of Engineering here in Republic City. Asami asks, how do you build a skyscraper? And Yasuko goes on to explain it. And this is where it's weird. We're already onto the second page of this book, and it's like, okay, Yasuko's nice. But the book's about explaining how a skyscraper is built? Okay. So yeah, she gets like it's a whole thing. Like she gets Sammy to fold some papers and to sort of use paper as a mimic for the construction materials of the actual skyscraper. And she talks about how you make these triangular structures, you stack them side by side, and that makes for a very strong platform to put something quite heavy on, and you kind of build it up in that way. Now, along the way, this is the one kind of interesting part of this, is that she does talk at length about like how steel workers deliver the metal beams, metal benders bend them into triangles and make the skyscraper sturdy. Firebenders heat up coal to make digging machines work so that non-benders can dig the ground. And it's just this, she goes back and forth about the idea of it's this joint project, how you need benders, but you also need non-benders as well. And that's how skyscrapers actually get made overall. And so it gets tall, of course. She describes it like businesses. This one's going to be a school for engineering. Sammy asks, do I get to go to the school? And Yasuko's just like, if you want to. It won't be built for a few years, but it will be an honor to have you attend one day. And she's like, can I help to build the school? And she's like, yeah, I'd love your help. And she's just like, yeah, there'll be plenty for you to do. You have a big imagination. And she's just like, okay, why don't we, both of us together, sit down and design an art floor for the students to use to draw blueprints like we're basically just about to do. There's a nice hug between the two of them. And then Yasuko's assistant is just like, yeah, you've got a lunch meeting in 15 minutes. And she's like, clear my schedule, me and Asami are doing something. And that's the end of the story. So it's nice because you do get the kind of cute scenes of like Yasuko hugging young Asami and seeing how nice the relationship was. But other than like good mother, you find out, I suppose, Yasuko's involvement with the whole future industries and stuff like that. She's an architect, and it helps to sort of explain like, okay, Asami gets some of her skill set from her father, but also some of it from her mother. It's kind of nice. It fills in a few little gaps, but it's like, I definitely wanted a little bit more. And sure, I can maybe see why they perhaps in a short story collection like this didn't want to just deliver us the kind of tragic backstory of Yasuko dying. Because I do think they tend to lean with these stories in the direction of like them being not as intense as the proper stories. And so they're more sort of like for kids type things, so they stay away from that stuff. But it is a better story idea than I think we had here. And I get what they're doing here. It's like, this is to highlight that because she explained benders and non-benders, this is an example that Asami grew up, and before what happened to Yasuko, there wasn't any issue between benders and non-benders within the family, as far as we're aware. Yasuko didn't feel that way, Asami didn't feel that way, and in fact, they were aware that they had to use both benders and non-benders to kind of make their dreams a reality and so on. And there's a little bit of the, Yasuko inspires Asami to get into this side of things, which is nice, but it's just 4 stories. And I wish we had got a little bit more on this, in that if it was more of like a 10-page story, even just like a little bit, like say last 2 pages, like Hiroshi comes in, I would have liked to have seen the whole family when they were happy. As is, it's like you did what you could with 4 pages, but I'm left wanting more Yasuko, to know more about her, and obviously still to get the details on what exactly happened to her in the past, of course. Next, we go into Wisdom, which is the name of the Guru Lahima story. And again, like I said, it's 2 pages, and there's not a lot of dialogue in it. It's just, it is said that a young airbender once undertook a pilgrimage to a mountain overlooking the Northern Air Temple to seek wisdom and the poetry of the Guru who lived on the peak. But what is wisdom? Asked the Guru. Is it poems written on a page? Is it actions done in my name? Is it words spoken on the wind? Wisdom is formless, for only the wind remains when all else is gone. So it is written in the poems of Lahima. And the main visuals here are, you just get the sort of character that actually went up to the mountains to meet Guru Lahima. this airbender girl here. You can see Gurulahima from behind there, that like he wears relatively normal airbender clothing for the most part. You never see his face overall. And then on the second page, it's basically just the idea that she gets to see him kind of levitate off the ground. And because of the like legacy and what is known about him as a legendary character, it is said that when he learned the technique of flight, he never once stood back on the ground again. So is this the last person who saw him with his feet on the ground? And is this where some of those legends come from? Who really knows? It's nice, it's interesting, a little bit thought-provoking. The art style is nice, but maybe just for a short story. And it's like, okay, cool. But I'd like to learn more about Gurulahima. Again, I would have liked a full actual story about Gurulahima. Instead, it's just like, okay, bit of a dialogue about wisdom and so on. Which is nice enough, but again, nothing too much to say there overall. Next, we get to A Change in the Wind, which, like I said, is my favorite of the news stories. The art here is really, really great. But anyway, Change in the Wind, like I said, it's a really strong character book. There's not a lot when it comes to the actual plot, because it's just Asami, Korra, and Jinora are in one of Asami's planes, and they land on this sort of like plateau somewhere in the Earth Kingdom. There's been some problems with the plane, so they've come down to fix it. And it's basically just this discussion that they have here while the spirits around them begin to get angry at the plane, which disturbed some spirits in the air before they landed, which kind of caused the problem with the plane. And it's all about Jinora's with them, so she should be able to use her spirituality and calm down the spirits. She's got a great relationship with the spirits, but she's encountering some sort of struggles, like personal struggles, that she needs advice on. And so first time sort of like speaking about them to other people, and Asami and Korra help her through them. So this is where we get our sort of Korra Asami stuff of just like Asami's fixing the engine and she's like, it sure is chilly. And then Korra kind of comes up behind her and is just like, are you kidding me? This is nothing. And just like, I feel warmer already. And you get a kind of nice, Korra Asami little kind of kiss, kind of hug moment there, which is kind of nice. And yeah, the puffball spirits are kind of in the engine, of course. And they're like, well, Jinora is with us, she'll figure it out. They're just like, she's the super, super spiritual one. Even Korra, who's spiritual, leaves it to Jinora to deal with, which is interesting. And Asami's just like, yeah, we're not going to get anywhere until Jinora does that. But Jinora runs over and is like, they're swarming the plane, they're about to push it off the kind of plateau that they're on. And Korra's just like, okay, you do your spiritual thing, I'll hold the plane in place with my airbending, and that's what's going to happen here. So Korra is just here like doing a really cool like airbending thing, keeping the plane in place, and is just having this conversation casually with Jinora. And they say these puffball spirits, they travel on the wind. The strong wind that hit our plane scattered them. Now they're lost, and they think the plane is to blame. So it's sort of this idea that they kind of have misinterpreted a little bit of what actually happened here, but they're blaming it on the technology, of course. And Jinora says, I think they just need a little soothing in the spirit world, but Korra is still dealing with the plane about to be pushed off, so she attempts to do her meditation, to do her technique to go into the spirit world. Let's address the technical thing here. Technically, they have the terminology wrong here. Given what Jinora at the end of this comic actually does, she's not going into the spirit world. She is separating her spirit from her body, keeping her spirit in the physical world, and just using her spiritual form, basically, to interact on a more spiritual level with the spirits here in the physical world to calm them and send them away. They don't go into the spirit world because the spirit world, as we know, is a whole other world, and that is different than the physical world. And so they get that kind of terminology wrong. And now they do this kind of a lot when they refer to this. And again, I think they're a little bit afraid to get too technical with it and just be like, I'll use my astral projection technique, because they don't want to officially call it that. And I get it. It's the same technique that will ultimately allow her to go into the spirit world if she wants. This is just a stopping a step before doing that and just having your spirit outside of your body, but in the physical world. Like, I get it in that sense, that she's trying to sort of interact with them more on their specific level, but it is technically the wrong terminology to say that Jinora goes into the spirit world when what happens. Because if you take this literally, you are saying that the spirit world also includes a partial overlap, or like basically the spirit world also includes a full overlap with the actual world, and like a secondary kind of like dimension here, so that you can sort of transfer between like the spirit world, the physical world, and then spirit form, physical world, which I don't think is actually the way it's meant to be. But again, this is a character piece. It makes me slightly lacking in confidence about the writing here, but hopefully on a story that more heavily deals with the technical aspect of the spirit world, Avatar Studios would make sure to get it more correct. I can accept it here because the issue is literally just what a character is saying and not what is actually happening. What is actually happening makes sense. It is just the wrong way to refer to it as. But anyway, so here's what's happening. Jinora is trying to meditate and go into the spirit world. She's trying to astral project, basically. And she gets into a sweat. She's trying, she's speaking, she can't connect with her meditation, and she just screams out, I can't go into the spirit world. And she's like, I haven't told anyone this yet, but lately, every time I try to meditate, my mind starts spinning out of control. And it's this really interesting moment where we also get Asami being very calm in this sort of crisis situation, where Jinora is panicking because the plane's about to be pushed off the edge. And so to see Korra so calm holding it up, and Asami so calm just coming over to Jinora to be like, talk to us, there's time, say what you want to say. And she's just like, Korra has that over there, talk to me. And Jinora goes on to explain that, you know, like there's more airbenders at the temple more than ever. I'm trying to help everyone as much as possible, but I don't feel it's ever enough. Despite all my efforts, some of them don't take me seriously, I guess because of her age. She knows she should have more patience, but I'm trying as hard as I can, but I'm frustrated. And the advice that Asami gives her here at first is just that, like, it is okay to feel frustrated. Like, I know what it's like to have a lot of kind of responsibilities on my shoulders. Being in charge and being in a position where like you're in charge of other people. I know what that's like. And I like it because this is what Asami can give advice on. She has this challenge of like managing future industries, this giant company and stuff like that. She knows kind of exactly how this feels. And yes, at this point in time, it's a bit of a new situation for Jinora to be like one of the high-ups in kind of the new airbender kind of culture society, as like one of the main teachers, both in terms of the spiritual stuff, but also in terms of airbending. And there's a lot on her mind. That side works against the kind of peace required for her spirituality. But there is another aspect to it too, which I love that they go into this here. And she's like, it's not like me. Now I can't connect with the spirit world. That's always been such a big part of me. Who I am without it. Who am I without it? So this is where Korra steps in. She's still holding the plane up as she speaks. It's just like, I get it, Jinora. When I lost my connection with the past lives, I didn't feel like the Avatar at all. But listen, I know you'll figure this out. I found my way, and so will you. And again, this is Korra coming at this from, in terms of this thing, the idea of defining yourself by your abilities. Korra has done that both with her bending and with being the Avatar. She can help her on this aspect of it. And Jinora says, but Korra, that's what I'm afraid of. I don't want to lose this part of myself. I don't think you will. And even if you do, it's okay. Back then, and we get an interesting kind of image where we cut to like early book 4, like in between the books, kind of Korra, when she went on her kind of journey after kind of recovering, where she was trying to put herself back together, basically. I was so back then I was so sure of who I was, but then things broke me apart again and again, and I had to learn to put myself back together. Sure, pieces may be gone for good, but I'm still Korra. A Korra I know better now. You're figuring yourself out, Jinora. That's a strength, not a weakness. And then we get kind of Korra and Asami sort of like, they kind of look into each other's eyes at this point to sort of like give the sort of combined like advice here. Korra's right, you'll never know what you discover about yourself. And here's probably a nice Korra Asami moment as well. If I didn't embrace my own discoveries, I would never have ended up with Korra. Don't worry, you might feel lost, but you'll never lose who you are. And this helps Jinora. She gets kind of back on track at this point. At this point, finally, Korra does lose control of the plane. There's so many spirits that the plane's being like taken away, basically. So Jinora lies down, fists together, and actually does... And you can see it very, very clearly here. She astral projects. When you see the blue spirit form, you know she's not in the spirit world, because again, they literally show it. She's sitting there on ground in the physical world. Her spirit comes out of her body, but is still here. If she was in the spirit world, the background, the location she's in would change. And she literally just, in her spirit form, basically connects with them. And she's just like, I know you're scared about what has just happened, but take a deep breath. You know where to go. And sort of... she doesn't do airbending, but, you know, she does the motion of, like, kind of blowing them away on the wind. It's time to move on. And that's where we go as the end. And interestingly, Korra's just like, and she thinks she needs my advice. And Jinora's just like, good talk, thanks you too, as the story comes to an end. And assumedly, they get off the plateau here. So it is nice. Like, that is a really nice thing, I think, to explore with Jinora, who had really good character development in Book 2 and Book 3. Got a little bit, I think, forgotten at times in Book 4, at a time when I think they could have done a lot with her. She hasn't had too much focus in the comics, so it's really nice to get something like this to acknowledge that she is in a higher position within the Airbenders now. But she's struggling with that in some way. She wants this, but she's struggling with it. And here is two older girls who've been in similar situations to her, helping her through it. And it's just a very nice character piece. Again, the only slight thing being that kind of terminology kind of point about how I understand it to a certain degree, in that they maybe don't want to directly just call that technique astral projection, and it might be sort of complicated to have Jinora say, I'm going to project my spirit out of my body and interact with the spirits on their level or whatever. But I do think it feels like the book is a little bit like, is there something wrong with just saying, like, connect with the spirits, talk to the spirits? Is there something wrong with the word spirituality? It's always like, connect to the spirit world specifically. And it's a bit like, what are you really kind of getting at there with that? But, you know, like I said, it's the best character stuff to me in the book. Weaver's Ball next. Like I said, this is the one that is, Korra has just finished her waterbending and earthbending training. Now she's moving on to her firebending training, which was what she finished in at the start of episode 1 of Korra. So we're going back, I suppose, like a couple of years here. My guess is that Korra here is maybe like 13-ish, 14, give or take. I'm not really sure. This is probably the one where I'm like, the art style I think works for a short story. This one I don't think I'd like to see for a full-on trilogy. So anyway, she's introduced to her firebending teacher, whose name is Master Yim. And we know this guy, of course. It's the same guy from the first episode. That guy right there. You can sort of see the way Korra looks here, that she's at that kind of middle kind of age here, in between kind of what we've primarily seen her as. And so immediately we get across the idea. Master Yim is very, very strict. He's heard that Korra can be a little bit kind of rebellious, but he doesn't want any of that. And he's just like, I want you to be on time. Any time possible, you'll be doing your training. Nothing else, nothing frivolous, basically. And Korra's trying to be like, well, it's the Spirits Festival this week. It's one of the few times I get to leave the training compound. Can I go? And he's just like, don't ever talk to me about this again. So he's being exceptionally harsh to her. We get a little bit of a montage of her doing some firebending training, but clearly she's distracted. She's looking to sort of where the festival is going to be off in the distance. That's what she really, really wants to do. And that's kind of what this one is actually sort of about. It's the idea that, like, it lightly tackles this whole idea of, like, more detail. What was it like for Korra in the compound? Was she just locked up at all times and never allowed out? What fun experiences did she actually have? And here's sort of an instance of one of them actually happening. And he just talks about how, this is very distracting. Interesting reference in the dialogue here. Go to your room and write out Avatar Zito's theory of grain distribution. So Avatar Zito reference, and a very kind of fitting one that of course he'd have something about that, about like logistics and so on. Grain distributions. Of course he has something like that. And she's just in her room being like, if I leave now and escape, I can get there just as the opening ceremony starts. Maybe I can do it, maybe. And she looks out and decides, yeah, I'm going to go for it. So she heads out into the Spirits Festival. She encounters some kind of kids her age. They don't really go into much depth on them. Basically, she goes over to a kind of carnival game, which is a sort of basketball-esque game type thing, where you kind of... You not quite basketball, like you have a stick with a net on the end. It's kind of like a netball type, not netball. I guess it's more like lacrosse, I guess, where you have to use the ball in the net to kind of throw it in through a hoop. And she just meets these people and she's like, I'm Korra, the Avatar. And they're like, what? You're the Avatar? Like, no way. And this kind of bigger kid who feels like the definition of like bully character comes up and is just like, prove it to me. And he goes to scream like, oh, she's lying, she won't do anything. And like, she says she's the Avatar, but she's not one here. Like, she's just lying to everyone. And he just keeps teasing her until Korra gets frustrated and firebends and burns the net on the game. And so they're all like, oh, you are the Avatar. Because I guess they can see that she's clearly Water Tribe, but she just firebends. So that's enough of a proof. And like, oh no, everything's on fire. But suddenly... someone water bends in the background, the fire goes out, and it's Tonrock and Senna. Senna is in the background as well. And Tonrock's just like, oh, we'll get you back to the compound here. You must learn to listen to your teachers. You could have hurt someone. And she's just like, he started it, but no. And then we get I think Senna is the one to say this. I know it's hard being here, away from home, but someday you'll understand. It has to be this way. And she comes back home, and she actually finds here that her father has brought the kids that she was interacting with and the sort of game to the compound. And it's just this idea that you may be the Avatar in training, but you won't be... You may be training the Avatar, but you won't be a kid for forever. Wow, I completely got that wrong. You may be training the Avatar, but you won't be a kid forever. I think it's a weird final line. That's why I think I stumbled over it so much, and that he's kind of half referring to Master like, Kim, you may be training the Avatar, but you won't be a kid forever. Like, I'm actually not sure if I like that final line here. But either way, the idea here is that, okay, so it's not just that it was all bad. They did what they could to sort of bring some fun to her in the compound here, so that it wasn't just that she's kept away from everything and so on. Obviously, we know that this builds to a big frustration, that they haven't told her the full truth about this. Obviously, there's a couple of layers to this in terms of the reveal in book 2 about, Tonrock's past, as well as they said, oh, Aang told us to do this, when it wasn't the case. But then you get the reveal in book 3 that it's because she was nearly kidnapped by the Red Lotus, and so it's those kind of two kind of nuanced positions. They don't go into that here, and it's, like I said, it's a relatively long story, and this is where, this is maybe the one where I think this could have been shorter, page count given to one of the other books, rather than really going in on this one when we already had the Friends for Life, which I think is a better story overall. I just think the takeaway from this one isn't quite as strong for me. So up next we have Cat Owl's Cradle, and this one is interesting because we have Alexandria Monique on art in this one, and she's going to be the artist on the upcoming Korra comic trilogy, it's one-shots, I think, based on what they said. I don't really know. But her art is excellent. It's really good, really on model, and I think we're going to be in for a treat with the Korra comics with her as our artist. But like I said, this is the Milo and Bumi story that has the sort of theme of them both reflecting on both of their parents being busy people. So of course for Bumi, that's for Milo, what starts this story is the idea that Tenzin said he would go on a trip with Milo, but something has come up that he has to do in the city, and he has to abandon these plans. So Milo is annoyed. He goes to Bumi, and Bumi is like, okay, I'll hang out with you, Milo. I know what it's like to have a very busy father, because of course Aang was also in a very busy position when Bumi was growing up. And so that's what this is all about here, is kind of having that connection of the two. And you see that this is a Milo who is kind of like really excited to go on this trip with Tenzin. And he does mention here at the start that maybe I can help with whatever you're doing, Dad, because I've been working on a new technique and it's almost ready. So he's kind of trying to be like, I'm nearly a master airbender now. Maybe I can be of assistance to you, and that way you can spend time with me. And they come back to this a little bit later on. And it's an interesting one, because he goes over to Bumi, and of course they get to thinking that like, oh, we'll spend some time together. We'll have an adventure of our own, since your father can't go out. And yeah, so they decide that what's going to happen here is that Bumi is going to bring him to the island they were planning to go to in the first place, which is this mysterious kind of island called Wangmo's Island that none of them have really ever been to. They know Aang has gone there a couple of times. But interestingly, this is a place Aang kind of never brought anyone else to. This is only a place he ever went to on his own. So Tenzin hasn't been there either. Bumi wants to know what's going on there. Milo does. So that's where they're going to go. And they think it's going to be a dangerous experience and so on. And they head off. Interesting detail. They head off in a Sky Bison, and they have stolen Kai's Sky Bison, Lefty. And he's just like, hey, that's my bison. And they just kind of head off. So there's some interaction back and forth here. Bumi tells some tall tales. Milo's kind of like, my dad always says you make those things up and so on. And Bumi's just like, he doesn't know, he wasn't there. And so they arrive at the island, and they kind of figure out that, okay, there's probably going to be pirates here because it's been so long since Aang was last here. And yeah, they figure out that, yeah, there's flying pirates here. So these are like sky pirates here. And this is just your kind of little action scene of the book. There's not too much to go into. These are pirates under Pirate Queen Zhang. And they're obviously on a biplane. And there's some cool kind of aerial combat going on here. Like you have Milo and Pokey flying through the skies. They're hanging onto the biplane. And they've got some kind of coils they're kind of sending out. Bumi gets tangled up in one. Milo has to like basically save Bumi's life from just like falling from like plane height onto the ground, and he does that relatively well. And Milo is the one to sort of save the day here, because we know he's surprisingly like amazing at this sort of like combat stuff. Like he's going to be an incredible master when he actually grows up a little bit more. So you get to see his skill here as he of course saves Bumi, and they arrive on the kind of like the island itself below the tree line, and the whole cat owl thing is very like minor. The title's Cat Owl's Cradle, and it's literally just that, okay, yeah, there are cat owls on this island, but that's not really the kind of point in all of this. They find the kind of ruins here and kind of head in, and this is where we get some of the more emotional kind of like dialogue here, when they really kind of reflect on this stuff. And that Bumi talks about here like, Dad always said this island was lucky. And this is where he explains that, no, he never brought me here. I don't even think Tenzin was brought here. But this is where your grandfather came to meditate when he wasn't sure of the best way forward. Aang had so many responsibilities, it must have been hard for him being the one person everyone looked to for help. The one person everyone expected to have the answers. And so it's just him reflecting on the idea of like, in a way, everyone always looked to Aang for wisdom. Where did he go when he needed kind of like advice? And oftentimes he would just kind of get away by himself to kind of get back on track. And Bumi does say, when I was your age, I didn't get it. I just wanted to pal around with my dad, but he was always so busy. Milo argues that, but I could help my dad since Tenzin isn't the Avatar. I mean, let's face it, I'm pretty great. Then why doesn't he spend time with me? Why does something more important always come up? And then you get the emotional part from Milo. Maybe I'm not good enough. He lets Jinora help him all the time. I keep thinking that maybe when I get my arrows. And Bumi doesn't let him finish that statement, and it's just like, Milo, earning your arrows couldn't possibly make Tenzin love you more. You're good enough exactly as you are. And here's kind of one of the main bits here. It's just like, the thing about our dads like ours is, they may be frustrating, they may not always have infinite time for us, but everything they do is to keep us safe. Milo says, I know, but sometimes I don't want to be kept safe. I just want Dad to be proud of me. And this is where we get, I suppose this is maybe a reference to the Kaya Bumi scene from book 2. Tenzin says to Bumi, I'm sure Tenzin is proud of you. I know I am. And Milo kind of returns the favor, and it's just kind of like, my dad always says that he's actually proud of you too, because you're doing such a good job like learning airbending basically at such an old age as well. So there's that as well. He brings up the idea your dad's always doing his best to juggle all his responsibilities. I'm sure he wouldn't want to have to deal with Beifong and Raiko every day, like if it wasn't absolutely necessary. So that sets this story obviously before the events of Turf Wars, because obviously Raiko is still president here instead of Zhu Li, interestingly. And then there's a nice point here of just like Milo makes the point of like, oh, Raiko and Beifong, they always are their faces just stuck in that angry like face the entire time. And he's just like, I think when the world is counting on you, you sometimes forget to smile. Even my dad, who had a great smile, would forget to from time to time. You remind me of him, and he's like, oh, I do have a great smile. And we see Milo's big smile there, his giant Aang grin, which of course we've probably seen a little bit too much of on some of the Aang action figures in recent years, but it's good to have that kind of character trait, I suppose. And here we go. So yeah, we get to the final page of the book. So they finally make their way to sort of where Aang would actually meditate, in front of the statue of Wangmo. Why it's called Wangmo's Island, of course. And they find out that, oh, Wangmo was a lady, and I guess she burped a lot. And it's just this kind of comedic statue here of this like old kind of airbender master woman who was sculpted in this burping face. And it's this reminder like that Aang basically went to this island to meditate on his own, to basically just remind himself to basically not be so kind of serious all the time, to almost remind himself that like the kind of fun-loving aspect of Aang, that's kind of who he is, and to kind of bring that back and so on. So a nice enough story there, and I like that they kind of tackled that. I really hope the fandom doesn't start using this story to go more in on the whole Aang is a bad father situation. I think this is a nice exploration of it here, because you can see that this is like book 4 Bumi, well after the book 2 stuff. They had already basically resolved that in book 2, and Bumi can now acknowledge that, like, sure, it wasn't amazing like all the time, that he didn't have the time for me, but I also do now in reflection understand the position he was in, and that he did everything that he could, and that he was under all this kind of stress, and everyone would go to him for advice, what about him type situation as well. And that he can give that advice to kind of Bumi to be like, in a way, don't go down the kind of path that maybe I went on a little bit, of feeling quite kind of negative towards my father. You don't need to do that. You can be more understanding of it, and just that, he will always make time for you kind of when possible. And I like that. You got a little bit more of a kind of serious side of Milo at certain points in this, and it shows the growth of Bumi as a character, and I thought it was a nice reflection on both Aang and Tenzin, and just that thing that gets brought up a lot, which is a character who is in a very important position in the world, them not having all the time in the world. And I think that's, you know, in my mind, pretty good. Pretty good that they were able to kind of make that work out. Final thing here is that, very interestingly, there's this amazing piece of art on like the kind of page after the last page of the book. It doesn't particularly seem to be connected to anything else, but I think it just looks, it's an amazing Korra book 4 image. Really like that art. Then you get the covers for some of the free comic book day books, of course. So that's interesting. And you do get a little bit of sketchbook stuff at the back, which is kind of nice. So you can see there, one of the planned ideas for the cover was actually a near kind of kiss between the two of them, but they went for the kind of weird Rava splitting them both in half kind of situation, which is probably a little too symbolic for how relatively straightforward most of the stories actually are. Other than that, it's kind of just sketchbook stuff as you would expect. Not too many pages of it. It's just what, 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that it? Yeah, just 4. Yeah, just 4 pages of sketchbook, which I think is kind of fine for what it is. So overall, it's like I can't bring myself to be hugely negative just on the content of this book. It absolutely could be better, but it's better than short story collections that we've had in the past. So I find myself leaning towards being decently positive about it, but just definitely delivering the feedback to be, the stories need to be more consistently on the level of some of the better ones in this book. Page count allocation should be a bit better, and then character allocation needs to be better. No Mako, no Bolin in any of these stories making an appearance at all. That's not good enough for what this book is sort of meant to represent. It's not good enough. And then because of other stuff with the story selection, I think you're probably going to frustrate like Korrasami fans, fans of other certain characters and so on. Just to know that the stories are not as varied as they probably should be. And then some of the few ones that are varied are the stories that don't get the page count to shine. And so there is definitely a path that you can go on with this book where you can be quite critical. I'm choosing to kind of be like, you know, I think 7 is a positive score, but it leaves room for improvement. And that's where I stand with this book. It's just like, I like that we got it this year, but we should never have a year post Avatar Studios where the only thing the comic publisher for Avatar and Korra can put out in terms of new content is just this. That's kind of the kind of thing I'd have to say about this book. So, they're my overall thoughts on Legend of Korra Patterns in Time. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the stories that are new in this book, and a lot of the interesting stuff that I talked about at the start of this video as well. But other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.